Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here. Thank you, Archbishop. Thank you, Father. Thank all of you for this really, it's very exciting for me to be in Oklahoma City for the very first time. So I'm delighted. I am a little daunted at the same time because, of course, this is a luncheon talk. And so we are going to fill you with very fine food, put you in a darkened room, and talk about pictures. What could possibly go wrong? There's a reason why they call art history art in the dark. So I am here with the instructions to talk to you about beauty in 30 minutes or less, which is feeling kind of Lenten to me, hence the purple. It's like trying to deliver a TED Talk on beauty. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to try to give you a TED Talk. We're going to cover 2 points. And the first point is going to be the present state of our understanding of beauty, the modern relationship to beauty, and in a certain sense, what we would describe as our distrust of beauty. And the second point we're going to dwell on a little longer. And that's going to be the why of beauty in Christian and Catholic art. Why did the church invest so much money, nurture artists so intently? Was it for its own glory, like a haute couture Oscar gown on a mediocre actress? Did we not believe in our own product? Or was it to elicit something deeper and greater? And so that is where we begin with the idea of, can beauty be trusted? Now, there's very good reason to doubt beauty in these days. There's actually 3 reasons I can think of. One is the flashiness of beauty. We often mistake beauty for flashiness. Wherever we go, we've got the fashion world, we've got Hollywood, celebrity lifestyles. They claim beauty. They hold up this beautiful world, the beautiful people. And we know this to be untrue. We can see that it's not real. Pope Benedict XVI described this type of beauty back in 2002, when he was still a cardinal, with the lines of a beauty that is deceptive and false, a dazzling beauty that does not bring human beings out of themselves to open them to the ecstasy of rising to the heights, but indeed locks them entirely into themselves. Such beauty does not reawakening a longing for the ineffable, a readiness for sacrifice, the abandonment of self, but instead stirs up desire, the will for power, possession, and pleasure. It is the type of experience of beauty that Genesis speaks of in the account of original sin. Eve saw that the fruit of the tree was beautiful to eat and delightful to the eyes. So we have this first kind of beauty that is an illusion. The second reason why we might not trust it is because very bad people surround themselves with very beautiful things. The Nazis plotted the final solution in the glorious and the beautiful suburb of Berlin, Wannsee, surrounded by magnificent settings, listening to the most beautiful music ever composed. In that particular case, beauty seems like a fig leaf. When Napoleon filled up the Louvre, granted, Napoleon filled the Louvre with extraordinary works of art, but he did terrible things to get there. And Augustus, who created such an incredible revolution of beauty in Rome, in the meantime, on top of the bodies of everyone from Caesar to Cicero. So there is the aspect of beauty as a kind of fig leaf. We look at it, we go, oh, you're just covering up your bad actions with something beautiful. And at this particular point in time, this is the third reason why we might distrust beauty. At this particular point in time, it seems kind of wiser. It seems savvier. It seems like we know more when we understand that there is no truth to be found in beauty, that ugliness is the reality of the world, and it's best just to face it. Our world has embraced this path, with the world's most famous and celebrated artists producing works that display, to paraphrase Thomas Hobbes, the nasty, brutish brevity of life. And again, Pope Benedict had a perfect description for this. This type of art demonstrates the fear that in the end, it is not the arrow of the beautiful that leads us to truth, but that falsehood, all that is ugly and vulgar, may constitute the true reality and causes people at all times anguish. So I'm going to just show you, I'm starting out with 3 works of art right off the bat that will give you an example of what I'm trying to describe. These are 3 of the most famous artists today. These are the most highly paid contemporary artists. We have Damien Hirst's this is what rocketed him to fame. It's called 1,000 Years. I probably should not have shown you this during lunch, now that I think about it. It's a rotting cow's head, which has larvae on it. Then the larvae turn into flies, and they get zapped at the top, and so then they fall down at the bottom. And of course, it's supposed to make us think about the passage of time in a very ugly fashion. Here's the next work. It's by a woman named Tracy Emin, who's having 1 million retrospectives right now. She's an incredibly popular artist. It's a huge exposition at Palazzo Strozzi in Florence. The work that brought her to fame is the work called My Bed. And so we're looking at the bedroom of a single woman, 1990s, and we're looking at this sort of tragic, lonely, pill-filled life. And then this one, which was at the Art Institute of Chicago, I got into all kinds of trouble because I laughed my head off when I was walking through this exhibition. I thought it was really funny to pay money to stand in a room where you're being yelled at. And so these all caps series of slogans, highly political art, where this is, again, very famous artists, where the idea of brutality, the truth, all of this will be found in ugliness. Now, interestingly, a year ago, since we're in Oscar season, in a certain sense, Hollywood did kind of catch up to the fact. I don't think they realized they were doing it. But the 2 movies that were running sort of neck and neck for the Oscars last year, one was called The Substance, which is about the seeking, the desire for that superficial beauty at all costs, right? It gets apparently a little weird and freaky. And the other one was called The Brutalist, and The Brutalist was a movie about how, even when people seem to be good, they're really bad, and the world is ugly, and the world is brutal. And so these 2 axes that are very much part and parcel of our world today. There's a really interesting. It's a very interesting. There's a very interesting note from a man whose name was Leo Leibowitz. He is the editor of The Tablet, and he's an Israeli-born writer. But he has a way of describing what has happened to art that I think is extremely helpful, and also us as an art consumer. He says, like Prometheus, each artist discovered to whom fire truly belonged. Each was obliged at one point or another to acknowledge that divorcing the creative process from faith meant denying a profound truth about humankind. Chasing greatness, all of these artists eventually settled on political dogma, faint metaphor, or some other poor replacement for the still, small voice of divine revelation. Yet their fans, or the people who buy these works of art, crave this voice. Our religious imaginations are blunted by decades of vulgarity, titillation, or commerce, and therefore, at this moment in history, we search for it in all the wrong places. And here we are, where we are right now. There's the problem. We don't trust beauty, or we've been effectively blind to it, but it does make one curious. If beauty is all this much of a problem, why did the Christians ever get into the business of art? After all, the other great monotheistic religions never really produced a great deal of art. Muslims don't make art. Jews didn't paint paintings. But there is a reason, and there's a reason for why they don't do that. So why did Christians get involved with the question of art? Well, that brings me to the second part of our talk, which is primarily about wonder. What kind of beauty awakens one to the ineffable? A beauty that elicits wonder. What could be more wondrous than God becoming a human being to know us, to love us, to allow us to know him, and us to love him? So we start with the Greeks, who have a true sense of what wonder can do in this amazing sort of Western civilization around the Mediterranean. The Greeks began to think about that uniquely human experience. And from that uniquely human experience of wonder comes first philosophy. If you look at the stars in the heavens and you begin to say, well, I wonder why these exist, what they're there for. And from there, it allowed us to ask bigger and bigger questions out of art. And that really is the importance of art as a conduit to allow us to ask bigger questions. Now, we fast forward here to the moment when St. John Damascene in the 8th century makes this incredibly clear for us that when God, who is ineffable, so if the reason why the tradition in Islam, there's no tradition of figurative art in Islam, there was no tradition of figurative art in Judaism. God is ineffable, he's great, he's grand. Any attempt to try to circumscribe him with a human pen is a form of blasphemy. But St. John Damascene in the 8th century described for us why for Christianity it is not only not a heresy, but it is actually an imperative to make art. When he says, who is pure spirit, without form or limit, immeasurable in the boundlessness of his own nature, existing as God, takes upon himself the form of a servant, in substance and in stature, and a body of flesh, then you may draw his likeness and you may show it to anyone willing to contemplate it. The idea of art, which is to open us to the wonder of God's presence among us, his physical and real presence among us. As a matter of fact, he has another line comes much later. We must, if St. John Damascene says, we must allow ourselves to be filled with the wonder at all the works of providence, to accept and praise them all, overcoming any temptation to identify them aspects which to many may soon seem unjust and iniquitous. So basically he answered this question 1,000 years ago, so I don't know what I'm doing here. So the fact of the matter is, historically, this is, again, because this is TED Talk version, I'm not going to drag you through the whole history of art, but I will tell you that a lot of people figured this out after the Greeks. We can look at Egyptian pyramids, we can look at the temples on the Parthenon at the top in Athens, we can look at the Pantheon in Rome. There has been a long-standing sense in how to create wonder through architecture, through art. But instead, for my purposes, I am going to take us to 3 artists, 3 works, and 3 ways that they elicited wonder. And then we can wonder how we can revive that. These are 3 very different men. The only thing they all have in common is that they're, Italian. Although they would have told you, one would have said, oh, I'm not Italian, I'm a Milanese. Oh, I'm not Italian, I'm a Florentine. But the fact of the matter is, what is Michelangelo? Michelangelo in St. Peter's Basilica, he's going to give us engagement with the past, but looking to the future. So he will be someone who can stand on the shoulders of a past greatness, not be afraid of it, and project a beauty that will last towards the future. Caravaggio, the man who can look into the heart of darkness, the man who can look into the brutality and the nastiness of the world around us and see a redemptive light in the middle of it. And Bernini, in a world that is being dominated by science and empirical knowledge, he reminds us that there is a world out there that our mortal eyes cannot see, but our souls can. So we're going to look at 3 works. We're going to get these three different approaches And we'll see that again, Benedict XVI, who I love to quote because I really, really hope that one day he will be Dr. Pulchritudinis, he's the one who sort of, again, led most of my thinking. He writes, to admire the icons and great masterpieces of Christian art in general leads us on an inner way, a way of overcoming ourselves. Thus, in this purification of vision that is a purification of the heart, it reveals the beautiful to us, at least a ray of it. And in this way, we are brought into contact with the power of the truth. So let's start with our first work, St. Peter's Basilica. St. Peter's Basilica, 500 years ago, in 1500, was falling apart. It was already over 1,000 years old. They had built 120 side chapels into the building. The church in 1500 was just about to undergo the trauma of the Reformation. And so the church really was visually, when you went to St. Peter's in 1500, it was listing to the side and there were 2x4s holding it up in the back, which is a very bad metaphor for the church. It was Pope Julius II who came up with a rather startling idea of, well, maybe instead of propping it up, we could rebuild it. And in stepped an architect named Donato Bramante, who came up with the completely crazy idea of tearing down that church, the old church, and building a brand new one. And so the project began. In 1506, Maestro Bramante, who would from that moment on be known as Bramante Maestro Ruinante, took down the ancient church of St. Peter's and began to reconstruct it, trying to fuse together two of the most famous works in antiquity left in the city of Rome. On one side, on the right-hand side, you see the Basilica of Maxentius, which is the largest building left in the Forum. The other building is the Pantheon. And Bramante's completely crazy idea was to take the Pantheon dome and stick it on a reconstructed Basilica of Maxentius, and Julius said yes. So the church was torn down. They're 8 years into the project, and then Bramante died without leaving instructions. So there you are with this rubble on the ground, the Protestant Reformation happening, the Protestants looking over going, so how's that thing to Peter working out for you? And along comes Michelangelo. So here was the plan as Bramante designed it. He intended, again, these are the original design that Bramante had. It was going to be a square church with a round top. Michelangelo took over, when Bramante died, he only had left those 4 piers. The 4 red circles was the only thing standing when Bramante died. The problem with the 4 red circles, though, is that they were the supports for the dome. So the minute that those piers went up, the size of the dome was decided. It's 137.5-foot span of brick and masonry. No one knew what to do. So it was 30 years of a revolving door of confusion until finally they brought in Michelangelo. I think it's interesting to realize Michelangelo was 70 when they finally approached him. The job had been open for 30 years. They hired anybody. If you could build a house out of popsicle sticks, they would consider you for St. Peter's. But Michelangelo, they made him wait, and they made him wait, and they made him wait. And then finally, just at the moment he was trying to retire, is the moment that they say, hey, maybe you could do it. Michelangelo built St. Peter's Basilica for no money. He donated the last 19 years of his life. He is the original steward of St. Peter, if you will. He donated the last 19 years of his life to the building of that church. He did it for, and I quote, the glory of God, the honor of St. Peter, and the salvation of my own soul. So any idea that people have that Michelangelo was a crypto-Protestant, you might want to drop kick that one over to the corner now, because that's not who the man is. Michelangelo takes over the project of the Basilica of Maxentius and the Pantheon dome. He makes a very, very important change. You can see the Bramante plan on the left where the squared off sides were. It was a square building with just a dome in the middle. Michelangelo's plan did something very important. It did 2 things. The first thing was it rounded the sides. So when the church was still a Greek cross, you would have seen these projecting sides that were rounded. And the dome itself, the second thing is he lifted the dome on top of a drum. So what he was essentially building was the head and shoulders of the church. Whoops, there it comes. Let's see. It was essentially the head and shoulders of the church. Michelangelo, whose love for the human form was explained in his own poetry. And in this way, he writes, "Nowhere else has God deigned to show himself more than in human forms sublime, which, since they image him, they alone I adore." So even in this last work, he's making the human body. This is this representation of the human body, the head and shoulders re-emerging onto the landscape after an absence of almost 100 years. Another big change he made another major change to Bramante's plan. And the other one was where the original plan was much, much closer to the Pantheon. And here's the interior of the Pantheon. The Pantheon is a building where the dome sits directly on top of the body of the building. The head of the dome sits directly on top of the body of the building. That's because the builders of the Pantheon were pagan. And they believed that men became gods. So the head, so the upper part of the body and the lower part, they're all fused together. In ancient architecture, the dome is heaven and the lower part is earth. So they're taking heaven and they're fusing it to earth. The height and the diameter are the same. So the horizontal line, which is earth, and the vertical line, which is heaven, are basically equal. Michelangelo spent 19 years recalculating the weight of the dome of St. Peter's. He lifted it on top of a drum. He put 16 windows on the base of that drum. When you walk into St. Peter's, you will forget that's 137 and a half span of brick and masonry. It's not about the brilliant engineering. It's not about human beings taking heaven and fusing it to earth when and where they like. Michelangelo's church gives us the wonder and the amazement of the heavens that appear to be hovering over the tomb of St. Peter. You see the way the light plays through the dome, giving you a sense of weightlessness. So when you look down, this is on June 29th, which is when the pallium takes place. And when the archbishops receive their palliums, this is the effect that takes place at 5 o'clock, right around the feast day of June 29th. But the beauty of this work is look directly below the altar. What have you got? There's the tomb of St. Peter. He never forgot where he was building that dome. The dome is sitting directly on the top of the tomb of Peter. Then you have the heavens hovering above it. The heavens who are indeed hovering above as the custodian of the tomb of the first pope. But when the Pope celebrates Mass at that altar, which you have all seen, actually we saw very beautifully in the inauguration ceremony, the consecration ceremony of Pope Leo, that was the moment everything awakens in that space. There is the Pope standing above the tomb of St. Peter. He's in the footsteps of St. Peter. Michelangelo's dome floating above his head. What do we call the Pope? What is the term we all use for him? Pontifex Maximus. What does it mean? The great bridge builder. Michelangelo, with his dying breath, showed us the Pope as the bridge between heaven and earth. Today we have the 267th successor, but we have this beautiful line between heaven and earth, which elicits wonder every time the Pope celebrates Mass there. So from there, we move on to the next guy who is nowhere near quite as ready for prime time. Caravaggio is a far more, even though he shared the same name as Michelangelo, he certainly did not share the same resume. Here you have his numerous self-portraits, from the young man who was hopeful and excited when he first came to Rome, to the man who will be eventually kicked out of Rome for various crimes. He is a character in art history who would best be described as mad, bad, and dangerous to know. That does not mean he didn't have contributions to make. Caravaggio came to Rome. He was born in 1571. He came to Rome. He's a tough guy. He got kicked out of He got kicked out of Milan, apparently, for fighting. And you'll notice that in his art, he does like to represent swords a lot. This was a man who, unfortunately, was legally allowed to carry a sword, and he carried it. And that meant that he got himself into all kinds of brawls. He had a terrible time controlling his temper. He always imagined that his pride had been affronted. He is quite literally the worst person you can imagine hiring for the Catholic Church in the midst of this post-Reformation era. And things come to a head in 1606 when he just gets into the world's stupidest fight over a bet over a tennis game. And during that bet, they pull out swords, and then suddenly one person is dead, and Caravaggio's still alive, and he's wanted for murder, and he has to run. Caravaggio will make his way to Naples. He shows up in Naples in 1606. He's a wanted criminal. He's a fugitive from a death penalty offense. He comes to Naples, and the Neapolitans don't care, which is still very much the truth in Naples. If you commit a crime, just go to Naples. I don't care. And so he appears in Naples, and the Neapolitans are like, so, do you want to paint for us? And Caravaggio, in many ways, knows that it's going to be his artistic reputation that will eventually redeem him. So he works for this group called the Young Men of the Misericordia. These are 7 wealthy young men who were so inspired by Jubilee 1600, they decided they would form together a little confraternity to do acts of mercy. Caravaggio was to do the main altarpiece above the altar called the Acts of Mercy. It's the Acts of Mercy like no one's ever seen them before, and only Caravaggio could have painted it. Here you have the 7 Acts of Mercy taking place in a Neapolitan street. I don't know if you've been to Naples, but that is not the place you're looking for the acts of mercy, right? You're holding onto your wallet, you're taking off your jewelry, you get really nervous when the dark corners happen. And Caravaggio, the only man who could have done this, looks at that city and sees the redemption in those people. And so this mysterious light that made him so famous, he casts that light, not coming from a window, not coming from a torch, not coming from a lamppost. He casts that extraordinary light on people doing the strangest things that nonetheless are acts of mercy. This is the story of Simone Impera. Simone was a man who was left to rot in prison and die of starvation. His daughter Pera came to feed him because she was breastfeeding her own child. So you have giving drink, visiting in prison, that's a twofer. You have the one source of artificial light in the painting as you see the burial of the dead. You see the bodies being brought out. Here we have a man sharing his cloak. He's giving clothing to the naked. At the same time, he's being welcomed in by another man who's giving shelter to the stranger. You can see the drink to the thirsty in this crazy, jumbled composition of everyday people that you might actually kind of cross the street to avoid if you were in Naples. Caravaggio was able to cast that light on the reality, the ugliness, and see the redemptive beauty within it. And finally, forgive me, I'm going to go 5 minutes over. As I've said to somebody, I can't help myself. TED Talk is, even I went over my TED Talk. So the fact of the matter is, the last one I just want to bring out to you is Bernini. And Bernini, I think, is important because of the fact that Bernini is a figure who helps us understand in a world of science, in a world where there always seems to be an answer, a fix for everything that the scientists, no offense to the scientists, can give us, that there still is room for things we cannot see. And he did this in this exceptional work of St. Teresa in Ecstasy. Bernini, he grows up in the age of Galileo. And I can't begin to tell you how important Galileo, let's put aside all of the stuff we've heard. Galileo's arrival in Rome is one of the great moments in the history of art and in the history of understanding the world in general. The Jesuits go nuts. They start studying. He'll be in Rome actually these 3 different times. These are all before the trial. He brings a new telescope, a telescope that can amplify human sight. 20 to 30 times more. It's the first time anybody can see these things. He's showing people the moons around Jupiter. The cardinals are getting in line to go see it. And young John Lorenzo Bernini, who was about 17 years old, goes and looks through a telescope, and there is a gadget that can make the human eye see something it couldn't see before. And that young artist in development began to think, wait a minute, I could be the gadget that can help people see things they cannot see of the spiritual world. And so Cigoli, who was a friend of Bernini's father, did this famous image, which is in Santa Maria Maggiore. It's inside the chapel of the Madonna Salus Populi Romani. He's an artist who does the very first image of the lady standing on the moon, but the moon is actually drawn from observations through the telescope. So it's a totally exciting age. Everybody is on board, like, wow, this is so cool, look at all the things we can see. And so at the same time, the world is expanding. You have a church that is in the four corners in the world, from the Peru to the Philippines. We have missionaries, we're learning about what's going on in the furthest corners of the planet, which we didn't even know existed. And in comes an amazing Saint Teresa of Avila, which I think I just heard you're going to go visit, right? Teresa of Avila. Teresa, who in the midst of this world, she's got a great story, but we don't have time for that. In the midst of this world, she opens up this window into seeing things that other people can't see. So if I hear one more person standing in front of this work of art going, well, you know, she suffered from epilepsy. No, thank you, armchair. Thank you, WebMD. This experience she has, these favors as she describes them, the angel who pierces her soul, pierces her body with a dart, this pain, which is so excruciating until the dart is removed, and it's filled with a sweetness that immediately makes her forget the pain. So we have this incredibly vivid description, which we're just going to not even mention Dan Brown, because that's too stupid to be brought up in this august company. But that image, the dart, the wounds that Plato talks about, the way beauty, true beauty wounds, the way Benedict XVI talks to us about the arrow of love, of beauty that wounds us, but then that wound opens us up to all amazing possibilities, in particular the love of God. And in the case of Teresa, what she is experiencing is the preview of her own death. The understanding that all those things that all of us are hoping for, we've put on our ashes, we've started out Lent. What's the whole point? We all want to get to heaven, and we really hope there's heaven. I really hope so, because, 40 weeks without booze is going to be really hard for me. I really, really hope there's something at the end of this. So the fact of the matter is, she knows. She's already experienced that through the pain of separation, she will be filled with such a sweetness that she won't even be able to describe it. And Bernini decides, I'm going to show you what that looks like. And he brings together all the arts to do it. Bernini is the first artist to think like a movie director. He's bringing together painting and sculpture and architecture, creating a theater. In his theater, where you have the seats off to the side where the members of the Cornaro family who paid for it, they get those seats. You know who gets the best seats in the house? We do. When we walk into that church, that's our seat. And we look at how all that colored marble in the middle on that stage, look at Teresa and the angel who are suspended. Physics, all those rules that Galileo has explained for us, they do not apply when it comes to the supernatural. And the light that descends through an opening at the very top and suspends Teresa and the angel in this glorious moment when Teresa has this fullness of the understanding of God's love for her. The really beautiful thing is that you have these families on either side. The Cornaro family are all churchmen. They're really rich. They're from Venice. They build churches, they buy books, they buy libraries. They have like 1,000 religious orders all praying for them. I mean, they're kind of like, why not me? Like, shouldn't I be getting this? Like all the stuff I do. So why does this young woman from Spain get this incredible experience? And, here we are, the Cornaros sitting off in the sides. And the reason is that Teresa really offers herself entirely to Christ. And if you look underneath that robe, that big fluttering robe that Bernini carves, you can see that same sense of offering that we see in Christ, in the Pietà, is the same body that Bernini picks up and produces as Teresa offers herself entirely to the Lord. And so these three incredible ways of producing wonder. Wonder by showing us things that are beyond our scope. Wonder by engaging with the past, but showing this Christian present. Wonder by finding light in the darkness. It is a very interesting concern to find that now people are trying to look for wonder through the artificial. And I don't think that's going to work. I don't think artificial intelligence is going, I'm not that worried about artificial intelligence. My husband works in this field in theology and philosophy, and he's worried, but I'm like, nah, I've seen golden calves before. We get over it. But again, it has a lot to do with, I just wanted to end with this beautiful quote from Augustine, because I think Augustine is already going to give us a sense of how we come out of this. Augustine, when he was very young, he wrote a book on beauty. He was about 27 years old. He wrote a book on beauty, which was form and appropriateness, I suppose. And he believed in this kind of sense of the form was everything. And he says, he did not yet perceive the hinge upon which this impotent matter turned in your wisdom, O thou omnipotent, who alone does great wonders, and my mind ranged through corporal forms, which I defined and distinguished as fair, that which is so in itself and fit, which is beautiful, fair and fit. That was the name of the book. And I suppose it's also a workout plan. And it corresponds to some other thing. And this I supported by corporal examples. Once Augustine, his attention was on beauty as something of this world. And then many years later is when he finally realized he corrected and redacted his old book. And that's where we get that famous line, beauty ever ancient, ever new, late have I loved you. How you have cured, you've dispelled my blindness. And so this is a way of just bringing you a little bit of hope that beauty can be trusted. We just need to recalibrate our eyes and recalibrate our lenses so we can experience wonder. Thank you.